Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moppin coming at you again with another APGov video. We're taking a look once again at topic 5.4, how and why political parties change over time. Today we're taking a look at the idea of trying to make political parties more representative of the electorate in terms of giving people that voice. And this is really important because, if you're a political party, there's only one ultimate goal. That's it. Win elections. And you win elections by having the support of the majority of the voters. Now that sounds very simple, but it certainly, of course, is a challenge. And so in order to get that majority of voters, you have to be able to build what are known as coalitions. A coalition is a group of different people or groups of people that come together for a shared purpose. And we use that term coalition in terms of coming together to win elections or to govern, etc. And both of the major parties, the Democrats and Republicans, have to build coalitions to be able to win. There is no, for example, elderly person's party. There is no woman's party. There is no Latino party. You have to bring in different groups of people together to win on a broad national level. And so the way that these parties operate and organize, that's essential in terms of trying to be able to build that support to be able to win these elections. And we've seen, at least on the Democrat side, a significant amount of attempts to try to make their party more receptive to the direct messaging of their supporters. And a lot of it comes in the wake of the disaster of what was the 1968 Democratic National Convention. Now, the DNC convention in 1968 was in the midst of the Vietnam War crisis. It was in the midst of the counterculture. So you're talking about a nation that was going through tremendous changes. This was an event that took place within 3 months of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy both being murdered. And so this was a time when America was going through tremendous tumult, tremendous change. And part of those, changes that people wanted was more of a direct voice in how these major parties operated. Now, the DNC, like the RNC at the same time, was still mostly driven by old school political leaders, political bosses, and things like that. And so if you're talking about nominating a candidate for president, yeah, you had primaries and caucuses and things like that in various states, leading up to the national convention. But most of these primaries and caucuses were, for lack of a better term, just big glorified polls. Because the results of those primaries and caucuses did not necessarily correlate into delegates showing up at the convention supporting the candidate that the voters wanted. And so you had this disconnect. And it was very, very apparent in 1968 where, most of the Democrats wanted a strong anti-Vietnam candidate, but ended up getting a candidate that was in support of the war. That was Hubert Humphrey. And so there was a sense that the Democrat Party is being controlled by a very, very select group of people that are not listening to the demands and the concerns of their supporters. And guess what happened? The DNC convention was such a nightmare. It was such a mess. It was filled with violence and disorganization that the Democrats ended up losing that election. And that's how Richard Nixon becomes president following the 68 election. And so in the wake of that, we're going to see the Democrats start to kind of learn from their mistakes. And this creates what's known as the McGovern-Fraser Commission. And what this does is basically say, hey, as a national organization, the DNC, Democratic National Convention, or Committee rather, we are going to make a concerted effort to try to attract more people into the party from, minority groups, diverse parts of America, etc. In other words, to really try to become what we would call a big tent party, so to speak, in terms of demographics. But beyond that, the idea of changing the processes for how you're going to send delegates to the national convention that are going to be in line with what people want via primary and caucus results. So what does this mean is that now today, the vast majority of delegates that vote in the convention and actually choose the party's nominee for president, they are people that we would call pledged delegates. In other words, folks that have been sent by their state parties to the national convention and have been told how they must vote in that nominating vote based on what the state primary or caucus results are. So, in other words, if a candidate receives, 60% of the vote in a state's primary, then 60% of those delegates from that state have to vote for that candidate that got 60%. So, it's much more directly representative of what voters want. That being said, though, it's not all of them. It's not all of them. You still had about 20% of the delegates that were not sworn pledged delegates. They were what we would call superdelegates. And that term superdelegate is going to start to be used in the 1980s. And it's just the idea of these are folks that are not just your run-of-the-mill delegates that have been selected by state parties to go and support pledged candidates at the convention. These superdelegates tend to be very, well-known, high-profile, powerful leaders in the party. They could be governors or mayors or, whatever. And these are folks that are assumed to be such loyal supporters of the party that they don't need to be pledged to a specific candidate going into the convention. They can make their decision of what they think is best for the party at the convention. And historically, since the McGovern-Fraser Commission in 1972, superdelegates had not really had much of an impact. Well, that changed in 2008, where you saw the superdelegates actually be the determining factor in who won the nomination between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. It was the superdelegates that mostly went for Obama that put Obama over the top. And so what that has done has led to a desire to remove more of the superdelegates from the nominating process and expand more of these pledged delegates. And we've seen that happen more and more. Bernie Sanders, for example, following the 2016 election where it was him versus Hillary Clinton, made serious inroads into changing how the DNC operates. So when we look at the DNC, they have a very representative process of choosing nominees that their supporters directly want and advocate for. Now, that is a very good thing in many respects. You're talking about democracy, representing the people. The downside potentially of this, and this is what, many in the Republican side kind of argue, because the Republican Party doesn't really do this. The Republican Party, does have pledged delegates, yes, and their primaries matter and count. That's all true, but some of the Democratic Party, but more on the Republican side, will make arguments that if you have a convention process where the people are directly choosing these candidates, you run the risk of the people getting swept up by an extremist candidate ideologically. And if that were to happen, then generally that party's nominee is going to get bludgeoned in the general election. So, for example, a Bernie Sanders might be very popular for those on the left, and the Democratic Party, certainly is more representative of the left than the Republican Party is. And yeah, if, most of the left want Bernie Sanders to be the nominee, and he gets the nomination because of the direct representativeness of the process of the convention, well, then you might have a leftist in Bernie Sanders going up against a more centrist Republican, and with the idea being that Americans are more centrist than extremist ideologically, and therefore that extremist candidate is going to get destroyed. So that's something to consider. So anyhow, just be mindful of the process by which the parties have changed, at least on the Democrat side especially, to go through the process of having the people have more of a direct say in who these nominees are than what we used to have, 100 years or so ago. Okay? We'll see you next time.